Okay, so it's fantastic to be here. The reason that we wanted to look at two different perspectives in that exercise was it's kind of easy to say, okay, let's look at the business, let's think about it in the future. And we're sort of priming our thoughts with, sort of our hopes and dreams that are happening today. Now, I've got an 11-month-old son, and obviously that's really wonderful. It's also been incredibly challenging during the beginning of this pandemic, and it's certainly brought me very close to him and my partner as well. And it's also been very stressful. But if we can start to put ourselves in the mind's eye of someone else that's going to be living in the future, so Maxi is going to be 30 years old in 2050. Then you can start really broadening your horizons and perspectives about what can happen and what that experience can be like as being an adult. But within this presentation, what I'm going to do is really show you a number of things that I'm watching in the world, and I've been watching for a number of years. I speak to lots of different clients from around the world, from trillion-dollar tech companies through to governments, people like NASA, and design places like IDEO. Okay, where does my story as a futurist start? Well, it starts at the age of 8 years old. My father bought me this book. I grew up in the UK. I was born as a great publisher. I don't think you can buy this anymore, but there's some PDFs online. Go and take a look for that. The Osborne Book of the Future. So it was a trip to the year 2000 and beyond. And it was interesting because there was lots of space and undersea mining and all sorts of fantastical, technologically driven futures. And that sort of really ignited a lot of thinking for me. I eventually went to university. I didn't do very well in school, but eventually made it to university. I studied applied psychology, computing, artificial intelligence, linguistics. This was the mid-90s. Things didn't work very well. Big philosophical discussions around, does grammar exist? What will machine learning, artificial intelligence do to the world? And fast forward 25 years of data, building data infrastructure, management consultancy. And when I moved to British Columbia in 2008, I worked in advertising for a number of years. And now I live in Toronto. But it's interesting when we start to think about that future, because it's not about a singular future, it's about a plural future. So futures, because every single person that's as part of this meeting today is going to have a different perspective on the world and what they want their future to be. So as a futurist, I have to understand that you've all got perspectives, you've all got different trajectories, and we're all going in a different direction. And what I do when I sit down with executives, the C-suite, the board of directors, other people within companies, and I just say, okay, you have to shift your mindset from what is to what if. Now, what does that mean? What is? What's on my plate today? What do we need to get done in the next 3 months? What do we need to do in our jobs as CPAs? But if we start to shift our mindset towards what if, we start asking the big questions, and we can be creative, and we've given ourselves permission to say, oh, what if the world was different? And what if this part of the business was going to evolve? And what if this part of the business doesn't exist in 10 years' time? What if there's big global changes that we have to consider, whether that's everything from climate change, and certainly in British Columbia, you're feeling that a little bit this week, all the way through to energy, the way that we're going to work, and culture and societal change as a whole. I like to really ground my presentations in a little bit of history, and I like to go back to think about the industrial revolutions and where they came from some 260 to 280 years ago. And the industrial revolutions really came from 3 dimensions of change. Those 3 dimensions of change were communications, energy, and transportation. Big innovations in each of these areas: the printing press, the steam locomotive, coal, fossil fuels, really boosted the economy, grew GDP. It changed the way that we work forever. And it's really binded us together in society. And we're still held in that industrial complex today. But change came quickly when we hit the 1900s, and the industrial revolutions that came before were really accelerating the way that our society works. Look at this picture of New York City. Okay, this is 1900. Cars weren't that common. Where's the car in this picture? Oh, there it is. Just one car, New York City. 14 years later, where's the horse? There's no horses. There's no people tending to the horses because no one's owns a horse anymore. No one's getting someone to take them around in a wagon. everyone's got cars. This was the revolution that came from Ford and other motor vehicle companies as well. And obviously we saw that trajectory through in Detroit and the car industry around the world. And it's still a fascinating industry that I speak to and I'm interested in with a lot of my clients as well. But now, today, we're in a world that's connected. The internet is ubiquitous. Our connections are ubiquitous. We've all got smartphones in our pockets. And what we've got is we've still got those three dimensions, but communications are faster than ever before. And they're coming from all directions, and social media and other forms of communication are just driving us forward faster than ever before. When we look at energy, it's about renewable energy. You know, it's about moving away from the carbon economy that we've been caught in today and the years that have come before us. And then when we start thinking about transportation, it's going to be automated. It's going to be electric. I drive an electric car. And a lot of you will be doing that within the next sort of 10 years. And British Columbia is a great place to buy an electric car as well. They really support it. There's great charging infrastructure. But this connected world really creates some harmonization across these different dimensions. The fourth industrial revolution is also about a world where people can have all of these things and have access to them. And there's going to be people that may get left behind. I work with the United Nations, and we always say, you know, don't leave anyone behind. So we have to kind of think about equity and equality and access as we navigate our jobs and our society as well. But it's kind of taken a pandemic to show us the fragility of this industrial revolutions that we've gone through. It's so fragile that we saw everything from hospitals and medicine, PPE, all the way through to schools, different kinds of jobs like taxi companies. I mean, we look at Zoom. We're on Zoom today. Zoom's got a bigger market cap than Exxon Mobil right now. This is a changing of the guard. There's a digital revolution. There's a transformation that's here. It's not coming. And really, it's really ingrained a big change in our lives. E-commerce in 8 months last year grew more than it would have done over 10 years. These are huge cataclysmic shifts to society. But we like to frame things, and futurists have got lots of different models and different ways of speaking about change. One of my favorites is from Jim Data, who's now retired, but out of the University of Manoa out in Hawaii, which is a beautiful, beautiful place. And he says that there's 4 states that we're in. We're either continuing our business as normal, we're finding the limits and discipline. I think we found a lot of those limits and discipline in the past year. We're transforming, which is great. But also there's businesses and there's people that are in decline and collapse. People are really failing. And we look around, and a lot of businesses have failed and had a really hard time and haven't been able to adapt during the pandemic. But there's been a lot that's been able to pivot what they do and transform. One particular story is I live in the Junction Triangle region of Toronto, and I love it here. We moved in a week before lockdown, which was always fun and very lucky. Next door to us is a museum of contemporary art. Next to that is a brewery called Henderson Brewery. Lockdown happened, Henderson pivoted, and the next day they managed to change their business to be able to do delivery. They tripled the size of their business. They became one of Canada's fastest growing companies. That's transformation. And there was a lot of other places that really struggled. Lots of restaurants, unfortunately, due to lockdowns, have been shutting. Lots of hairdressers, you know, they still can't cut hair here in Ontario until tomorrow. So it's been a real challenge. But yeah, we can frame ourselves. Okay, so let's get into it. I've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to go pretty quickly. Signals of change are the things that I see around, and futurists and foresight folks see out in the world that indicate to us that change is coming. It might be in academia, it might be research and development, it might be in an industry. We can look at startups, we can look at trillion-dollar companies, we can look at everyone and say, oh, that's interesting. What if that was going to grow and scale and suddenly have a global impact? Let's get into global shifts. I think that some of these early parts of this presentation really go into some of the big global dynamics that I think we should have an awareness about. And we should start to bring back some thoughts about, oh, what if that's got an impact back on us in British Columbia and Canada? The world population is changing. African population is absolutely exploding alongside South Asia as well. And we're going to see a huge changing of the guard in terms of those economic centers around the world. In fact, by the year 2030, this is predicted that China's GDP is going to grow to 64.2 trillion, with India just behind it at 46.3, and the United States is in third position. And suddenly that changing of the guard gets really interesting when we realize that a lot of these economic powers have shifted towards Asia. There's going to kind of be some ringleaders in there, and they're going to come together as a powerful unity. In fact, 35% of global GDP will be from Asian countries by 2030. How are we operating with our Asian partners and our Asian counterparts? How are we learning from them? How are we helping them? I think that it's really important to look at that. What if we have more of those relationships and that transforms? British Columbia has got a huge Asian population, and that's actually a bridge into these new economies. And Africa as well is absolutely exploding. 2.5 billion people will shift to urban populations by 2050, which is incredible. 90% of that will happen in Africa and Asia. In Africa, the median age is 18 years old. And if you've ever spent time there or you've met African business people, they're hugely entrepreneurial, they're very innovative, and they're really going to make huge changes in the world. In fact, we're starting to see a massive shift of population and major cities around the world. 2025, we've still got North America, Mexico, some South America, with a bit of a spread across Asia and Africa as well. The populations are going to start to explode in Asia and Africa. And by 2100, the biggest cities in the world will be in Africa and they'll be in Asia. You're going to have Lagos, Nigeria, with 88.3 million people, a city with 88.3 million people. And that's taken from some work from the United Nations and the University of Toronto. It's pretty incredible. But what's interesting about that, when we look at today, is that there's a lot of foreign-born populations in major global cities. So what does that say to me? And what does that make me think of? What if these people come and they set up their own businesses, their families, and they become part of our communities? That's awesome. But what if they take the skills that they learn and they build those bridges into Africa and Asia, and they start to build that new kind of global economy and that new dynamic? Now that's really interesting. I used to live next door to a Ghanaian guy called Ebenezer. He had 5 children. He was a pharmacist. He owned 2 pharmacies in the UK. He owned 3 in Ghana, and he used to travel between them. And that was kind of a model of what I think is going to happen in the future. He's a fascinating guy. And how can you not love a guy called Ebenezer? I mean, that's a name from the 1800s right there. Okay, what's interesting though, when we come back to BC, what's happening there? Well, 44.8 thousand new immigrants arrived in BC last year. That's still a good rate, even though we had a pandemic. That means that the economy is growing and it's going to become more diverse, and there's going to be more businesses built, and there's going to be more help needed from them by the CPA. Okay, climate and energy. We should really get into this. We are now in the Anthropocene. The Holocene was the last age, and that Holocene was very much about the planet being in a sort of a stable climate, and everyone's thriving. Homo sapiens thrived in that time. Now we're in the Anthropocene, which is the age of man. We are impacting how the planet is every single day by our actions. In fact, I just watched a documentary on Netflix, and do go and watch this, called Planetary Boundaries. And that documentary got David Attenborough. It's also got Johan Rockström from the Stockholm Resilience Center. And they talk about the 9 dimensions and boundaries of the world. So ocean acidification, phosphorus cycles, freshwater usage, biodiversity loss. And they sort of rate that in terms of, are we doing well or are we not doing well? And we can certainly see that there's a crisis around climate. We're losing tons of biodiversity, and that's not good for flora and fauna. The nitrogen cycle is out of control, and we've got to get a grip. The good news is, because the Anthropocene is about our actions, we can change how we operate. And we're going to see a lot of the businesses that you work for changing how they operate in the world. We saw EDI discussed as part of the exercise before. A carbon neutral or zero emissions future isn't going to be a promise of 2050. In fact, if there's a company out there that's saying, okay, we're going to be good by 2045, 2050, these are our goals, you're just not trying hard enough. It's going to be 2035, 2040. There's going to be actions, and realize, and this is hugely controversial, certainly in the ecological world, zero carbon is almost impossible to reach. So why have it as a target? Why don't we just have clear goals about just reducing it over time? Because what's happened is you can equate carbon in the atmosphere with rising temperature. So we have to stop producing that carbon. There's not any magic out there or technology that's suddenly going to take that out of the air completely, even though there's some out there that are trying and really rebalance the world. We're going to get warmer. We're never going to get colder. Certainly not in the next sort of 50 to 100 to 200 years. In fact, we're starting to see the impacts today. I mean, BC is scorching. Lytton, BC, was it over 47 degrees? But I actually lean on a report from the United States Army War College, mostly because the people that are the naysayers are going to fight people like me that talk about this. And how are you going to argue against the US Army, right? So there's going to be more extreme weather events, rising seas and population migrations, decreasing Arctic sea ice and conflict over natural resources. The geopolitics is going to get really interesting. Drought and warming will put an increased strain in the US power grid. Watch this summer in the US. You're going to see this playing out and come into life. But there could be a good future. Carl Burkhart is one of these researchers that's doing some thinking about, what if 139 of the world's largest countries got together and they had strategies around decarbonization, looking at onshore, offshore wind, utility scale solar, decentralized solar as well, rooftop photovoltaics, even looking towards geothermal and hydro. And we're very lucky in British Columbia that so much of our electricity comes from hydro already. But really, it's a good investment to get into renewables. In fact, if we invest $1.8 trillion, we could produce up to $7 trillion in economic benefits. And that comes from the Global Commission on Adaptation. It's actually cheaper to run economies with renewable energy infrastructure than fossil fuel infrastructure. And in fact, 86% of global energy demand could be met by renewable energy by 2050. So this is our future. This is the future that we're aiming towards, and this is how things are going to change. In fact, you can see some signals out there of how the world is changing. Hornsdale Wind Farm down in southern Australia, they were having problems down there in terms of energy supply. Hornsdale Wind Farm came out and they said, oh, we can send electricity when the wind's blowing, but we seem to be losing the opportunity to store that. Anyway, Tesla's solar chief got online and he wrote an article that said, okay, you can solve this by putting in one of our battery farms. Elon Musk 3 days later went online and said, okay, I've just been chatting to another billionaire in Australia and he set me a challenge. We'll put this in under 100 days or it's free. So Tesla in 86 days built this battery farm, like one of the largest battery farms in the world. It was $50 million US dollars. The whole facility was 90 million Australian dollars, which is kind of similar to the Canadian dollar as well. In 3 years, they paid it off, and now they're making money. And it's good because that infrastructure is now paying itself off. We're starting to see decentralization. Go to Brooklyn, New York City. There's a community there with Brooklyn microenergy grids. The people are actually generating energy and they're storing it and they're trading it amongst themselves and they're putting it back into the grid as well. That's hugely interesting. Imagine a city where every single property is off grid. That's useful for business, and you're seeing lots of people like IKEA and starting to lean into that kind of philosophy as well. Then look at Holland. They've got an amazing initiative there called Die Aardehuizen, which is a micro village of these houses and these earthships that are completely self-sustaining. They grow their own food, they generate their own energy, they manage their own water, and they share that all. It's an interesting model to look at and how we could potentially scale that across cities as well. And then look at transportation, one of the dimensions of change in industrial revolutions. Electric vehicles, I said that I drive an electric vehicle, I bought it 3 years ago. Painful in Ontario and getting better because of charging infrastructure. Really easy in British Columbia because we got ahead of the curve there. But we're starting to see that really grow, and you're going to see that exponential growth in terms of the selling of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. The people that need a little bit more range than EV offers right now, and people that go full EV as well. In BC, zero-emission vehicles account for 8.4% of the province's total vehicle registrations. Quebec is going gangbusters as well. We've had challenges here in Ontario and some of the other provinces. But once we sort of get government behind this and we get more cars out there that are going to provide more range, that's really going to take off. And in fact, it's going to take off in industry as well. Tesla's got its semi. In Norway, you've got these electric car ferries that are out there. In China, you've got these ships that take containers up and down the Yangtze. This goes 40 miles up and 40 miles back. And when it's loaded and unloaded, it gets recharged. Ironically, they take coal up the Yangtze in this as well. That normally gets a laugh when I'm in person. Thank you for laughing. It's difficult to do this online. Okay, but in China, watch China and watch their electric infrastructure. They're rolling about 6,000 to 8,000 new electric buses every 6 to 8 weeks in their cities. They're going full electric. China's going to be a huge change. It's an interesting place to watch. But we're heading towards this future of global energy supergrids. And this is where we trade energy like we trade data around the internet. It's just fired around, it's generated, it's renewable, and it's traded across boundaries in real time. Electricity is going to be so cheap at this stage that suddenly we're going to be in a world where this can actually be traded almost at 0 cents, but the operators are going to be recovering the investment of the infrastructure. So that's what we're going to be paying for in the future. But I think the 3 things that you must hold in your heads about the future, the 3 dimensions, the 3 areas to look for signals: water, food, energy nexus. Water is going to be so important. We've got 20% of the world's fresh water in Canada. Not every community's got fresh water to drink, and that's still pretty criminal in my eyes. But water is going to be the backbone of geopolitical discourse in the next 30 to 50 years. And obviously, without water, we can't grow food. So that's going to be another major part. And without water, we can't have that energy as well. In fact, 30% increased demand for water by 2030. And so that's really going to impact us as well, because there's 40% shortfall of available water across the globe by 2030 as well, with an effect on 98% of global electric power generation. So how are we going to change, and how are we going to adapt to that future? And we've got water stress. There's a big gray area across Africa. We don't have data. I imagine water is in short supply there. But if we start to look, we've got places on the West Coast and then down into Oregon and Washington State, and certainly down into California, where water is becoming a huge political issue and very, very challenging, and all the way across that equatorial region of the world. But change is coming and we can't outrun it. On the left-hand side, we've got different scenarios and pathways put together by the IPCC, where there's going to be rises in surface temperature, precipitation, and average sea level. On the left-hand side, that's if we keep it under control to about 1.5 degrees centigrade. And on the right, that's if we don't do anything. And boy, we think it's warm now. That's nothing. And on the right-hand side, we've got people in Nantucket that are just moving their houses a little further away from the coastlines where they live, because they still like the view, but all of that's eroding and the sea levels are going to be rising, causing them huge issues. I don't think that those coastal homes are going to be very attractive in 20 or 30 years. Okay, let's talk about technology. Let's talk about that evolution of the industrial revolutions. I talk about infinite humanity. What happens when we start to ask, what if, and what if we have huge potential and hope as we step towards the future? Software is eating the world, said Mark Andreessen, a really famous venture capitalist. And he just really defined how the world was accelerating. In the last 25 years, all of these companies have been created. So 25 years ago, none of them were there. But think about it. 25 years ago isn't that far away from where we are today. So, Google, Zoom, we're using Zoom now, and Zoom's like grown incredibly. Airbnb, Valve, which is a computer gaming company down in Washington State, worth several $billion private company. Amazon and Amazon Prime and Amazon Everything. Magic Leap, which is a new world of augmented reality. SpaceX, space tourism. Who would have thought that that would come to pass, right? And there's Chinese apps, and there's apps from India, there's apps from Africa. And you know what? It's really interesting to see how the world is turning. You probably use a few of these. Your kids will probably use a few more. So this world of infinite humanity, as I call it, it's still got fast communications. It's still got renewable energy. It's still got automated transportation, all connected by the internet. But it's got our biology as well. If you wear a Fitbit, you're part of this world already. If you go to the doctor and they put your details into a system, and that system is used in a machine learning algorithm to help develop drugs or learn new ways to help patients, then you're part of this system. We're all going to be part of this system. And this is where the next acceleration comes from. But what about companies? So when I chatted to Laurie and the team, and they're like, okay, how does all of these big changes, how do they really relate to us? What's been changing? What's interesting to look at? So let's dive into that. I like to ground us by thinking about data. And I spent many years building data systems and analytics and artificial intelligence systems to really exploit that. But a lot of us are caught in a world where we're still at the data and information level. So we're capturing data, we're putting it in spreadsheets, we're trying to make sense. That turns into knowledge eventually, which is useful. And that knowledge turns into wisdom, which is application of knowledge over time. And collectively, we're learning about the world. And then we can do better decision making. We can evaluate, we can research, we can observe, we can give feedback. This is the job of CPA, right? And it's interesting to see how this is going to evolve. In fact, due to the connections around the world growing exponentially, the smartphones in our pockets, connected vehicles, connected planes, Internet of Things and smart cities and everything, we're going to be overwhelmed with digital connection. 4,900 digital data engagements per person each day by 2025. In fact, we probably won't know that 99% of them are actually happening. In fact, one digital interaction every 18 seconds or so. It's incredible to think. That's a huge growth in data, and that data is going to be exploited, and we're going to be able to use that to our advantage as CPAs or in any other job out there. But we've kind of taken our eye off the ball over the last few years. I think that the pandemic given us a reckoning to really come back and say, okay, we don't really have a grip on our digital world as best we had before, and we need to come back down to that. So we actually slipped as Canada down from number 4 to number 11 in terms of our digital competitiveness in the world. So what's our future readiness? What's our knowledge? What's our use of technology and regulations and such like? So there needs to be action. That needs to be at government level, but we can take action within our companies as well by asking, what if we digitize parts of our business we don't have digitized today? What are the benefits that can be delivered? How can we make that happen? And yes, there's an investment needed, but yes, there's going to be something that comes out of the back end of that, productivity and efficiency and all the good stuff. And really, that digital competitiveness and that ability to look to the future can help sort of shape and really explode the economy in BC across all of its sectors as well. Now, I've worked with Unifor and a lot of different other organizations that operate in BC, and all of these are natural resources, manufacturing, finance industry. We've got tourism. All of them need help. All of them are going to need to step up from a digital perspective, and all of them have to become more lithe and work more quickly. 88% of businesses worldwide plan to adopt robotic automation into their infrastructure. Now, what does this mean? This means that we've got a world that's headed towards artificial intelligence embedded as part of our systems. I can tell you now that you've interacted with many different systems that have got machine learning, artificial intelligence embedded in them today. I mean, Zoom likely uses machine learning, artificial intelligence. If you've been using Gmail or any other email system, it's definitely in there. And if you've been carrying around a cell phone in your pocket, it's definitely in there as well. So it's become ubiquitous. And people are saying that artificial intelligence is going to be as important as electricity for changing the dynamics of the world. Advances in AI will transform modern life by reshaping transportation, health, science, finance, and the military as well. In fact, Artificial intelligence has been used in the military. I was interviewed for a military job some like 26 years ago, and they were using early days of artificial intelligence, Lisp, and I didn't take the job because I didn't really like to work in that particular area. So I worked for a company that worked in space. So that was exciting at the time. But now the world is changing. If we look around us, we can see the world operating in a way that's very exciting. But it's going to get more exciting. And I put together a short video that just shows us that these changes are coming to our neighborhoods. It's interesting when we look at that video, the majority of those things are real and they're out there in the communities. There's one thing, and can you guess which one that isn't real today? Well, yes, the Amazon blimp isn't real, but Amazon's got a patent that was awarded to them a couple of years ago. Are we going to have blimps flying over our cities with automated drones delivering our gizmos that we've ordered online? Absolutely, we will. It's going to be an interesting world at that point. But when we think about artificial intelligence, is it going to have an impact on the economy? Absolutely, it is. They think that $15.7 trillion could be added to that economy by 2030. And that means that there's an increased productivity and there's some consumption side effects as well. The ability to drive more business and more connection is going to come from the embedding of artificial intelligence in the systems around us. In fact, it's getting more powerful over time. You know, from translating languages, eventually driving a truck fully autonomously, working in retail. People aren't going to be cashing you out in retail situations. The video showed Amazon's go full autonomous store. Why did they buy Whole Foods? Because of that kind of technology. Why is that important? If you're not actually looking in your basket and you're just putting it straight into your bag, you're not contemplating that. Daniel Kahneman talks about fast thinking. Fast thinking means you don't contemplate. And Amazon's going to grow its profits because we're not even going to think about what's in the basket by about 30% per basket. It's going to be interesting. Writing a best-selling book, working as a surgeon, I think that the world's going to be truly revolutionized. But we've kind of got this change. And the change is going to be that drudge work of data and information is going to be removed from our plate. And some of you might be thinking, that's great, I don't have to touch spreadsheets again. Some of you might be panicked because you love using spreadsheets. It's okay, we will get over this together. But really, knowledge and wisdom is going to be our business. We're going to get a lot of that drudge work out of the way. We're going to be more strategic, more innovative, and make big changes. Artificial intelligence is going to drive that evaluation, research, observation, and feedback. But what about jobs for the people in the places where we live and work? Well, there's lots of narrative out there around AI is going to destroy hundreds of millions of jobs around the world. Well, technology, when it's been introduced, has never really destroyed jobs. It's just changed the tasks around us. And really, we're human. And that's not really easy to replicate because What makes us human is empathy, humor, creativity, problem solving, and you can't codify and automate that. So it's about human and the machine. It's about us coming together. And I like to frame this as intelligence augmentation. So it's us and artificial intelligence and the other systems being able to do more in our jobs. And that brings me to think about the practices that we undertake as CPAs. What's going to happen? How is it going to affect us? And how's it going to change? Now, right now, executives are planning to redesign their organization to make them fit for tomorrow. So that's going to be restructuring, upskilling, reskilling, reinventing flexibility. All these other changes are coming. And what's interesting is that this is going to impact the businesses that you're in. And that need and that urgency for change is coming. And I think it's going to start bubbling up in what people are calling bionic companies. And the most successful businesses in the world operate across 3 different dimensions. There's a behavioral capital that we're starting to grow, which is the collection and modeling of data and applying that and learning from that and building that wisdom. Then we've got cognitive capital. And these are the algorithms in our businesses and the systems that codify our knowledge, can make sure that it's there from a historical perspective, and it can be used to model what's coming next as well. And then we've got the network capital as well, hugely important. Our partnerships, our connection points within our businesses and with the people that we operate with. And that might be down to the customer level as well. So the most successful businesses in the world are really mastering these 3 kinds of capital. And that's a step change from the old world of like natural resources and the such like that have defined us. Once we've enhanced the business, we can enhance our practice as CPAs and drive deeper layers of trust and collaboration. And trust is something that we really focus on. And to do that, we start to think about the literacy in our practice, the hygiene, the data, making it clean, making it usable, making it understandable. Being able to use that to start to predict and some of the shifts and where we're going, and the protection of our information so that it can be used as a valid source and it's unshakable. But artificial intelligence, as it comes into our systems, is going to help us in a number of ways. It can detect anomalies such as duplicate invoices or determine links between seemingly innocuous payments and other known risks. It can automatically assign expenses to the correct categories, ensuring the company doesn't pay out for items it shouldn't. We know that happens all the time. It certainly does in my business. Automate anti-fraud and finance management systems to improve compliance procedures. Broaden your predictive consultancy within your business and within your practice beyond just financial planning to incorporate other areas of the business. Become deeper strategic allies within the business across a whole number of different areas, and further enhance our competence and interpersonal trust internally and within the CPA community as well. And we start to grow that. It means that our practice and what we do becomes even more essential than it is today. Okay, thinking beyond that, thinking about those artificial intelligence, human and machine, augmented intelligence systems and what that means for us. There's some important things we need to realize that are going to be shaping our business as well. Now, 98% of executives plan to redesign their organization to make it fit for tomorrow. We've already spoken about this, but there's 3 different areas that I think is really important. One is about open government. We obviously operate in the cities and the provinces and within Canada and the wider world, but we're going to start to see initiatives where citizens and the power of engagement is going to really start to shape what the places that we live. And that's going to shape regulations. Those regulations are going to shape how we operate our businesses. So we have to be part of that open dialogue, and open democracy, and sometimes liquid democracy as well, is really important to understand. So breaking down silos, lots of conversations, platforms, both online and offline for engagement. How often do you chat to your customers? How do you bring them into the conversation? How do you get them to contribute to your business and its place within the community? Secondly, and this is a huge one, the circular economy. Now, I've done some talks for the Ellen MacArthur corporation that does circular economy work about reduction, reuse, and recycling of materials. We can't just have new things all the time. But if we start to lean in and start to think about reuse, reduction, and recycling, we can create up to 380 million global jobs, more than $12 trillion in business savings and revenue annually by 2030. That's huge opportunities. What are you doing in your business around circular economy principles? And then, I work with the United Nations, like I've mentioned before. What are we doing to understand the Sustainable Development Goals? How are we leaning in on those from a business perspective? Is it worth it, right? What if we do that? How's that going to change how we operate as a company and our profits potentially? The great company, Stantec, great Canadian company. Their 2020 gross revenue aligned with SDGs, with 7 SDGs, and that increased 7% to $2,334 million, and that's 49% of gross revenue, and that's up from 2019. And it's interesting when you see that 49% of gross revenue was aligned with affordable and clean energy, sustainable cities and communities, industry, innovation and infrastructure, life on land, life below water, climate action, clean water and sanitation. I mean, Stantec builds infrastructure and it builds buildings. So it aligns nicely with all of those. And because it's committed, it's now getting the benefit. And I think that that's going to be a big shift for all the businesses that you operate in. But another really important part of the dynamic that we need to understand is around inclusion and diversity. Now, it's spoken about today a lot, but we have to take more action. Diversity enhances creativity, innovation, and leads to better decision-making and problem-solving within our organization. Within the CPA, we probably need to be more diverse. We need to bring more voices to the table. We need to bring the voices outside to come and speak to us about our practice as well. In fact, $42 million in firm value is generated by having female representation in top management. We're woefully far away from having any level of decent representation across the S&P 500, right? We got work to do. We really, really do. And we have to think about, people of all ages being important, all education levels. In fact, a lot of these big companies don't even require people to have degrees anymore. Some of the smartest people I've ever met didn't have degrees, and they revolutionized the businesses that I worked in. People of different genders, BIPOC, thinking about the LGBTQ2S plus community as well, and more. Literally think about who you are and who you aren't, and what you need to bring into your life, and also the perspectives you need to understand, and sit and listen and bring those people into the business. Okay, sort of wrapping up towards the end of the presentation now. I want to talk a little bit about what I do as a job. And I work with companies to work on strategic foresight. And strategic foresight really allows me to help them build that vision of what if the world was going to change, and what if our operations, our processes, our governance, our data, our systems, the people, our families, the communities and government can all really start to evolve to be better and more equitable. Once we imagine the future, we can build a bigger vision, strengthen strategic planning, and anticipate risks today. This is exactly what I do. And those bigger visions and anticipation of risks has become incredibly important in the past year. I use something very simple to explain what I do. This is a foresight development framework, again, within the Futures community. Lots of frameworks, lots of images, but I like to frame things with certain principles. Humanity, not technology. Humanity first in everything that I do. Plurality, inclusion, and equity. Many different futures, many different perspectives. Everyone's valid. We have to bring them in for that conversation. And we have to lean into scientific fact and creativity. And then let's look at the signals, and we've looked at a lot today. Let's start to build out some scenarios. I'm working with a client looking at environmental signals and thinking about ocean communities and new kinds of cities. And what if the world becomes uninhabitable for many cities and underground habitation, whatever. I'm looking at scenarios, and I'm starting to write fun, short science fiction stories as well. That's speculative fiction. But we can frame it across financial, organizational, regulatory, cultural, environmental, political, technological, and social dimensions. This isn't a quick process. This takes days, and I've worked with everyone from research scientists to governments to really start to work out what futures they could see ahead of them. And really, we're looking at 5, 10, 20 years. We're looking at the projects, the investments, and the opportunities that lie ahead. And once we can understand this picture, And this picture will be rich and interesting, and it'll be visceral, and it will seem very real. We can put ourselves in that position and understand that there's some evidence from those future narratives that can come back to our business today, and we can start the work of heading on that trajectory towards a better future for all. And one particular client that I worked with, and this is about 4 years ago, I worked with YVR on their project YVR 2037. And what they were doing was they were trying to think about what that airport could be in 2037, so they could bring the public in and inspire them to think differently.
Plans for the future of YVR are taking shape. Our 2037 master plan is a blueprint for an airport that'll continue to reflect the best of BC. Sustainable, welcoming, and diverse. YVR will be a feast for the senses, a hive of activity and interaction, a business hub for entrepreneurs, and a unique retail experience that is second to none. Help shape the future of our world-class sustainable airport by attending public meetings and sharing your input online.
The power of futures thinking in this particular context was we went from 6 meetings. I think we had about 14 in the end, because more cities around the Greater Vancouver Regional District wanted to be a part of this conversation. More mayors reached out to the CEO and his team within YVR, and they got even more traction. About 18 million impressions online. Me and Craig would go on TV, and there'd be me with my tattoos, and he'd be the ex-jet fighter pilot, the super cool guy, and he'd be like, which one's the futurist, guys? And it's like, okay, that's fun. But really, we inspired people to think differently about the future. I wrote 5 science fiction stories, and what's interesting about that was it really inspired real world action. So one of the big ideas that I put forward was, why don't we have a vertical forest in the center of the airport? And that provides food to the airport as well. And this year they announced the Glassed-in Island forest with access to the outside. Whilst there's not food there, it showed that need for biodiversity and that need to have a connection with nature. And look, it looks exactly the same as the picture. And that was drawn by animators in Halifax that we worked with to actually bring that to life. So it's interesting when fiction becomes reality. In fact, firms that have a high future preparedness can expect on average 33% higher profitability and a 200% higher market capitalization growth when compared to the average. So having a futures mindset is actually better for your company. So I've been so busy, and all the futurists I know and the foresight practitioners have been run off their feet, and more organizations are starting to build out their capabilities because they know having that further view, even though it's speculative, is incredibly valuable, and it inspires people for change. And that's really valuable as well. And that's it. Shifting your mindset from what is to what if. What if that future could be different for you? What if the futures for us all can be seen, and we can speculate and we can understand how that's shaped and what the world could look like? How can we create this resilient renaissance that we need so much today? Everything from climate and energy to the way that businesses are run and how we service our customers and organizations.